The Bad Batch is over.
They're finally safe.
After 3 seasons, this series has finally come to an end. And if I'm being honest, right from the start of this video, it feels like there's still so much more we need to learn about so many characters that were involved in the Bad Batch, including so many of the clones. What is the fate of the clones and how do they get from the events of the Bad Batch to where Captain Rex, Gregor, and Wolf are on Sealos in Star Wars Rebels?
He's crazy!
With Season 3 of the Bad Batch now being complete and all released, I thought today would be the perfect opportunity to share my honest thoughts about the Bad Batch as a whole. Do kind of a review and a wrap up of the entire 3-season show, and perhaps give some thoughts on where this series might go into the future. I'm going to start with some honest opinions about the series overall, and then later get into more of the specifics of the show. Talk about certain scenes, some of my favorite episodes, some of my least favorite maybe. And I'd also love to know what you thought of the Bad Batch in the comments. Let's do it. Hey everyone, it's Andrew. Now, a few years ago, I made a review video about the Bad Batch Season 1 where I asked the question, is the Bad Batch better than the Clone Wars? And now that we have all of the Clone Wars and all of the Bad Batch, I think we can definitely say, no, it's not better. But it honestly depends on what we're comparing here. In terms of storytelling and narrative arc, I'd say that the final 4 episodes of the Clone Wars are some of the best Star Wars we've had in the Disney era. There was so much weight to those episodes, seeing the fall of Order 66, how it affected Ahsoka, Captain Rex, Darth Maul's involvement in all of it, and Ahsoka's connection to her master, Anakin Skywalker, who in that time became Darth Vader. It was a dark time. The tone of the show, the atmosphere, the vibe was just so on point with everything we wanted from Clone Wars Season 7, and it certainly delivered. The Bad Batch, however, hasn't really given us that level of experience. It's had a lot of moments here and there that I think are some peak Star Wars in recent years, but overall, in the 3 seasons of this show, I can't say it's some of the best Star Wars we've had. I think the term mid is a fair way of describing the Bad Batch as a whole, because for me this show has been just so hit and miss. Season 1 and 2 had so many epic, great, memorable moments, but then so many others that were completely forgettable. So many filler episodes which just seemed completely unnecessary, and sure, they were doing some character development, but I felt like all of that could have been done in a more efficient way and they could have really trimmed the fat. There were too many episodes where I'd sit down and watch and be like, why are we even seeing this? They feel like they're just padding out this series to make it to 16 episodes, and there's real no reason to be giving us this kind of episode. That was the case for mostly only Season 1 and 2. Season 3 didn't really suffer from those same kind of filler episodes, but it just felt like the pacing was a lot slower. Like they were really dragging out the events of the Bad Batch, and it took seemingly forever to get from the start of the season to the end. Each episode honestly felt really short, and like not enough was happening to progress the plot, especially considering the runtimes were sometimes only around 20 minutes. So I thought it'd be a fun idea to compare the start of the Bad Batch series in Season 1 to the end, at the end of Season 3. Bad Batch starts basically on the eve of Order 66. For me, the opening of this series was honestly really exciting, seeing initially how the Bad Batch members don't really get along with the other clones. They do stand out and are kind of different. We're introduced to Omega, and we see too how she is obviously also really different from all of the other regs.
What the?
And then also seeing Order 66 from a different perspective. I loved that at this time, a few years ago, we'd still had barely any looks at Order 66, it felt. Sure, we had the Clone Wars Season 7, we had Jedi Fallen Order at this stage, and obviously the events of Revenge of the Sith, but apart from those, we hadn't really seen much more of Order 66. Right now, it feels like it's kind of a bit overdone because we've seen more of it in The Mandalorian. Obi-Wan Kenobi, I think, had some, didn't it? But at this time, seeing it from the Bad Batch's perspective on a different planet altogether, and especially linking to the origins of Kanan, I thought was so much fun. And also seeing the division within the squad, the fact that Crosshair was willing to follow the orders of the Empire, even though he didn't really have his inhibitor chip, which was later revealed in the season. There was so much tension between the brothers at this stage, and we were slowly being introduced to each of their characters. However, in between all of this, like I said, the filler episodes were kind of killer, and for such a while in Season 1, it felt like the Bad Batch were kind of just aimless mercenaries. They were kind of just traveling the galaxy, going from job to job, just for the sake of earning money and feeding themselves and trying to stay alive, and kind of out of sight. They were purposeless, which didn't really fit with where they got to at the end of the season. I would have thought they would have had more drive to kind of save more of their clone brothers early on, and do more to fight the Empire, but they didn't really seem to have any of that. They were kind of just trying trying to stick to themselves and stay off radar as much as possible. I guess they were trying to get answers and figure out what was going on, but it still felt kind of weak. But all that said, I did love the opening of the season. I love the opening of the show, everything that happened with Order 66 and how we were introduced to the characters and the tension between the brothers. It was great. Now, comparing that to the end of the series in season 3, to see where they were then to where they are now, it's clear they've come such a long way, especially if we count the epilogue. By this stage, Crosshair is completely redeemed, regaining the trust of his brothers, and also being the one to free Omega from Hemlock's grip, and sending Hemlock overboard to his death. Which in some ways was kind of poetic, especially considering Tech died in a similar way to Hemlock, and Hemlock was, I guess, the one responsible for Tech's death. Also, by the end of the series, we'd seen these clones all bond together so much and bond with Omega. They meant so much to one another, being basically brother and sister and having the father-daughter relationship they did. And in the epilogue, it honestly was really touching and heartfelt and sad to see Omega leave. She's all grown up now. She's making her own decisions, and her adopted father, Hunter, doesn't want to let go of that. He doesn't want to see her go, even though that's the natural order of things. She wants to go and explore the galaxy, go fight for a cause, and go live out her purpose, just as Hunter did for the Republic and for Omega. But overall, am I happy with how this series ended? In some ways, yes, but also in others, no. I kind of liked that the remaining members of the Bad Batch survived, including Hunter, Wrecker, and Crosshair, and of course Echo. But I'm also disappointed we didn't really get to see more of what happens to the rest of the clones. What happened, for example, to Commander Cody? He was featured only in one episode of The Bad Batch, in Season 2's The Solitary Clone. And by the end of this episode, it was suggested he had defected from the Empire, disappearing after questioning orders and becoming disillusioned with the Empire's goals. This is part of what led Crosshair on his journey to also become disillusioned with the Empire and rethink his decisions. And honestly, I think it was one of the best episodes of the entire series. Seeing both Crosshair and Cody question the hierarchy of the Empire, the orders they were being given, and the lack of freedom they were presented with was really fascinating, especially considering Cody is, after all, the commander who ordered the first shot to be fired on Obi-Wan Kenobi at the start of Order 66. There's so much heritage here, and it was really cool to see his involvement in the Bad Batch, but we don't know what happened to him. Same goes for Hauser. Hauser in Season 1 was one of the most interesting characters in that season, just because we didn't really know where he lay. We saw him starting to question his orders, but also not really knowing what he could do about it. He knew he couldn't really stand up to the Empire, and we saw the conflict in him, seeing him in a tricky position, obviously not wanting to get himself killed, but also not wanting to follow the orders of the Empire. We know he is part of Captain Rex's clone resistance, I guess, but that's the thing. We know basically nothing of this clone resistance and what Captain Rex is up to in the background. We know he has a bunch of surviving clones who are all with him, who are all on his side. We don't really know necessarily what they're up to. The same goes for Echo. Honestly, at one point in the finale, I was really afraid he was going to die, especially when Dr. Hemlock's modified clone troopers were coming after him. I thought, oh no, they're going to kill our boy Echo, who's been with us since the early days of the Clone Wars. Our boy Echo at this stage has been through so much, being taken prisoner by the CIS, being rescued, being experimented on, and then being rescued by the Bad Batch at the end of Clone Wars Season 7 to then have such a prominent role in the Bad Batch. I was so worried he was going to perish in this final episode, but he made it through. But that said, we still don't really know what he's going to get up to. We know that he's heading to Pantora, as he says, to help Senator Chuchi get some of the clones settled and figure out their purpose following the events of the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch. But beyond that, we don't really know what happens to him, which leaves the door open, I guess, for another series. I'm sure it's some point Dave Filoni has an idea for where he wants to take all these characters, and perhaps they'll even show up in a Tales of style series, similar to Tales of the Jedi and now Tales of the Empire. Perhaps we're going to get a Tales of the Clones series, which I honestly think would be epic. I want to see the backstory of so many of these clones because they're such interesting characters. They develop these personalities, and there's so much more I think we could be getting from them. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about the villains of the series, in particular Admiral Rampart and Dr. Hemlock, because I think between these two characters, we haven't really had better villains in recent years across Star Wars. What's interesting is that both were driven by their own greed and hunger for power. First, I also want to talk about the portrayal of these characters. The voice actors, both incredible.
I will
Rampart on the one side is merciless and sinister, but also somehow kind of charming and ironic, and speaks with a lot of sarcasm.
What research could be of such value to the Emperor?
Whereas Dr. Hemlock is also sinister, but in a more menacing, creepy kind of way.
Omega will suffer the consequences.
Both villains who you know have a lot of power. And even if their presence isn't that intimidating, their sense of power really is. I think we all need to remember that Rampart is indeed the one who ordered the destruction of Tipoca City and the cloning facilities. He basically destroyed Kamino. But what's even more crazy about this is that he used the clones from Kamino that were bred and created on Kamino to destroy Kamino. That's pretty messed up. He's also the one who killed Captain Wilco in cold blood, because Wilco was refusing to keep information quiet about Clone Force 99's survival. And at the end of the series, his true personality came out once more for all those who thought he was going to be redeemed. There was no way that was ever going to happen. This guy is pure evil, even if he has some sense of charm to him. And he followed Nala Se into the research facility, shooting her also in cold blood, and then meeting his own swift demise. This was quite a satisfying, poetic moment. He had a chance to escape with the other clones, he had a chance to get away from all of this potentially, and yet he still chose to try and regain power and met his fate as a result. Now, Dr. Hemlock didn't quite have the same character arc as Rampart. Hemlock was, of course, the chief scientist who was entrusted by Emperor Palpatine to oversee Project Necromancer, which involved research surrounding M-count transfer, which is why, to him, Omega was so valuable, a clone with a high M-count. Now, does this mean Omega is Force-sensitive? Not necessarily. I think she is just more of a pure clone, similar to Boba Fett. They, as far as I know, are the most direct clones taken from Jango Fett's DNA. They're the most pure of all clones, and therefore are highly valuable. But that said, I don't understand why he also wasn't searching for Boba Fett, if this was the case. Why was Omega his only hope? Funnily enough, his dedication to this project is also the reason he met his demise. Realizing in the end he couldn't let go of Omega and couldn't sacrifice her because she was all he had left. Now, another standout episode of the entire series came in Season 2, the episode titled The Outpost. I think was one of the best this series delivered, because once again it showed how brutal the Empire are and the result of the clones and where they all landed following the Clone Wars. They were being repurposed by stormtroopers at this stage, and this was the episode that really humanized Crosshair. Finally, we connected with him on a different level. He saw his brothers being exploited, being killed, basically, and being, in the eyes of the Empire, dispensable. The relationship he developed with Mayday during this episode was, I think, one of the most interesting from the entire series, with the two of them going through adversity at the hands of the Empire, not really caring whether or not they survived, them finally showing up at the Imperial base, but Mayday not being able to make it and dying because of his injuries. And then what happens next in this scene was something I really did not see coming, but something I was so glad to see happen. It's so epic, it's so badass, and it's really something I don't think any of us were expecting. We all wanted him to shoot him. We're all like, no, he's not gonna do that. He's not gonna just shoot a guy randomly like this, right? And he did it! So good! Another highlight of the entire series was Plan 99, the final episode of Season 2, where Tech sacrifices himself. This again was, I think, something we didn't really see coming, and we've seen the Bad Batch in so many dangerous situations before, and somehow they seem to all make it out alive. But Tech's plot armor seemingly ran out. And even all throughout Season 3, so many people were like, oh, Tech's not dead, don't worry, he's one of those clones. He's one of Dr. Hemlock's clones that are gonna come back and he's gonna be redeemed, or it's gonna be a huge plot twist. And it didn't happen. Tech died here. This was his end. And again, such a sad, heavy-hitting moment. Not only considering that these clones have developed this relationship that we've seen them develop throughout not only the Clone Wars, but the Bad Batch, but also because by this point, Tipoca City and the cloning facilities have been destroyed. There are no new clones. All the clones that exist now are the only clones there will ever potentially be. So every death just feels more significant. The clones are no longer the indispensable armies of the Republic. By this stage, they're a retired relic, their numbers continuing to dwindle, and their purpose not entirely clear. Overall, I think I have to say I did enjoy The Bad Batch, although I just wish, as an entire series, there was less filler episodes. I do wish the ending gave us a bit more clarity on, I guess, what's next and where these characters are headed, but I do appreciate that they gave us the epilogue chapter, even though we didn't really see Crosshair or Wrecker. We only saw Hunter, which I honestly thought was a bit strange, considering Crosshair was the one who developed the relationship closely with Omega over season 3, and they also had that father-daughter relationship, but we don't see them in the epilogue. Why was it Hunter that was the one who was sending her on her way? I guess you could say that by this point in the series, Crosshair's arc was complete, he was redeemed, and he had found inner peace, but I kind of would have still liked to see all three of them older here, seeing her off as she goes on a new adventure. Perhaps we'll see more of Omega in the future. It seems like we're going to see more of all these characters in some capacity, and there's still so many questions left unanswered. There is one overarching thing I think needs to be said though. The Bad Batch was definitely incredibly popular when the show first released, and by the end of season 3 it feels like a lot less people were watching. Season 2 still had a little bit of hype around it, but season 3 for the most part felt just a bit dead in comparison. Not to say there weren't people watching, but it just didn't feel like the same buzz around it. And I guess Star Wars now is in a different place to where it was in 2021 and 2022, and there's other external factors like that to consider. But overall, those are my honest thoughts on The Bad Batch as a series. I hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know your thoughts on The Bad Batch, and let me know if you enjoyed this longer video and enjoyed me talking for longer than usual. For more videos like this, please subscribe. Come follow me on Instagram, Twitter, join my Discord and TikTok. Got 2 channels, remember, main channel, Clips channel. You can go subscribe to both those. That'd be amazing. And thank you for watching this. My name's Andrew. I'll catch you soon.